Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar from the EUA on national developments in learning and teaching. Many of you know EUA's work on learning and teaching. We have two main avenues. On the one hand side, we address institutional leadership in charge of learning and teaching and institutional development. And we have been doing this for a number of years through the annual Learning and Teaching Forum and through thematic peer groups and also projects. On the other hand, we also explore what happens at the European policy level. In the EU context, we just had published the EU strategy for universities, but also in the Bologna process, bringing together 49 countries across Europe, which has a standing learning and teaching working group in which we also participate. Increasingly, we have found that there is merit to have a closer look at Europe's national approaches, because there has been considerable development in the different systems in terms of reforms and regulations, but also on how ministries support and collaborate with universities on learning and teaching. This is a quite diverse landscape across Europe, and it is interesting in terms of development trends, but also as there might be opportunities to learn from each other. And this is what we are going to explore here today. I have with me my colleague Therese Zhang, who has been spearheading EUA's learning and teaching work for quite some time. And she just published a report on the issue of national developments and will share with us some results. And I also have with me as a second speaker, Terry Maguire, who has been at the helm of the Irish National Forum for Learning and Teaching. You have been the founding director, Terry, and you are also one of the chairs of the Bologna Process Learning and Teaching Working Group. So I think we start with an input from Therese, and then Terry comes in. But you are invited to share your questions and comments over the entire period. You see here on the slide on how you can do that. You can either contribute in the chat, so exchange greetings and complain when the sound doesn't work or the picture. But if you have questions to the speakers and to the presentations, please put them in the Q&A session. And then there will be also one opportunity where we invite you to respond to a poll. And if you want to look up the report, it's in the handout section and you find this all on your right side. I think that's what I had to say from the technical side. Just to remark that this is recorded and you can find it later on also on our YouTube channel. And with this, I hand over to Therese, please.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And I'm really glad that you were able to join us for this webinar on national developments in learning and teaching in Europe. So as Michael already introduced, what I'm going to present are basically the findings from a study that we just published in the framework of the LOTUS project. LOTUS stands for Leadership and Organization in Learning and Teaching at European Universities, and it is a 2-year project that EUA has been coordinating since last year and will finish in the course of autumn of this year. So I'll just take the next slide. Yes, it works. So I just would like to remind a little bit the background against which we conducted this study, but also generally EUA learning and teaching activities is that we really noticed in the past years an increased attention to learning and teaching, both from the higher education institution side with more dedicated, more strategic, more systematic approaches to learning and teaching. This has been clearly identified in our 2018 trends report, but also at European policy level, as Michael presented as well earlier, in the framework of the Bologna process and also in the framework of the EU, the European Union policies that relate to higher education. And in that context, we already published back in 2018 a first study on what is happening exactly at national level on learning and teaching. And the current study, the one published in February, is kind of a follow-up and an update for this study. So I just would like to see a very brief presentation of the methodology we used for this study. We conducted a series of interviews of 36 national experts between spring and summer 21. These experts were based in 30 European higher education countries. So those are the countries that are all cited, of course, in the report and that we studied. So we have not studied the 48, countries of the European higher education area. But this includes also the 24 of the EU countries. We worked based on a semi-structured questionnaire. So we had a series of predefined yet quite broad questions, and the study and analysis of results was published in February of this year. So what can we say from the findings we had in that report? The first thing we can see is really that there are measures and initiatives taken by public authorities, but also generally, there seems to be a general awareness that all solutions don't work anymore, and time has also come to take action to better address some challenges. And those challenges are relatively well known already, such as growing and more diverse student population, addressing societal needs, and basically trying to innovate a bit learning and teaching and innovate in a way that addresses these societal needs precisely. Ministries and institutional leaders become increasingly aware also of the necessity to promote teaching and introduce incentives to this end. And this has to be understood also against the background where research is heavily valorized in higher education, is still so, and where there is also a series of incentives and support measures that could be taken for further valorizing the education mission of universities. So since 2017-18, actually, there are not many countries where there's been a new regulation as such. And by regulation, we do not only understand legislation, like a new law on higher education, but also measures such as a change in funding rules, having a performance-based model that further includes, I should say, learning and teaching, for example. It could be a change in the QA framework that addresses teaching a bit further than before, or things like this. So not necessarily legislation, but still some changes at national level. These regulatory changes introduced in the immediate past years also become increasingly implemented and yielding results. So we had some examples cited in the report of new databases, new reward schemes for teachers, learning and teaching centers being more implemented at higher education institutions and in a more widespread way. So it becomes like a common feature for supporting learning and teaching at the institutional level. But what we also heard from experts is that there is not necessarily a need for more regulation because of a variety of reasons. It might be because there is autonomy for institutions and sufficient capacity also to develop own measures. And there is some kind of confidence in the initiatives that arise from grassroots level. And also, sometimes it might be a sign of concern over external interference and over-regulation in the field of learning and teaching. We can see in the various national initiatives taken that do not exactly relate only to regulation, that also there is here a myriad of projects and that there is dynamism and support, be it for the whole field of learning and teaching or for some specific parts such as digitalization, digital capacity, competences, for instance, but also that rewarding, supporting teaching through a variety and a combination of measures is becoming more and more widespread. There is also support generally for institutional capacity building for institutions, and also there is some dedicated funding for that, mostly EU, in particular Erasmus Plus and ESF funding being used in some countries for capacity building. This is especially the case, for example, in Eastern European countries and Central European countries, with some examples that really yielded to results. What we can also notice is the importance of QA for learning and teaching, the importance of ESG still, but also some changes in external QA frameworks. So a revision of external QA obligations, regulations, etc., but also better supporting the place of teaching in academic areas, teaching enhancement, institutional capacity building for learning and teaching, etc., and all this translated into accreditation or evaluation or review criteria in some countries. what we can see is that also dynamics for supporting learning and teaching come from an interplay of action led by institutions and supported by national structures, or a combination of action from diverse national actors and also active participation in this role of supporting learning and teaching. Actually, countries with a dedicated national structure for supporting learning and teaching are quite rare. We found 5 of them. Therese will further address this because she's from one of those 5 countries precisely. But also in many countries, in another 23 countries, what we found is that there is no dedicated national structure, but still the needs are deemed covered by another or by other actors. That can be national rectors' conferences, dedicated networks of educational developers, learning and teaching centers, networks of learning and teaching centers, and sometimes also national Erasmus Plus agencies or quality assurance agencies, or even the ministry itself. And then there is a strong focus here also on the role of learning and teaching centers based at higher education institutions. This was pointed out as clearly a developing trend in 7 countries at least. And also in some countries, nearly all universities do have such centers, or at least they find ways to work together in case they don't have, because, for example, they are a smaller institution in the country. I'm sorry, there are some ambulances on my side, so I hope you're not too disturbed by the noise as I am. What we can also see is, well, you can see that here the most commonly cited stakeholder groups involved in national policy making. In terms of policy making, what we can also see is that there is a great variety in stakeholder cooperation for policy making purposes. And this really ranges from system level approach, systematic consultation, to less systematic approaches, precisely rather ad hoc exchanges. But also what we could see is that opportunities to exchange between different types of stakeholders and discussing different interests across the board could be increased. So ministries would not systematically take the lead in policy making. The most common seems to be that they're involved in supporting or identifying some priorities or goals, and then there is a complementarity between different types of actors, and institutions are left with the implementation role, and they might opt also for different modalities in implementing policy priorities in learning and teaching. Another point we examined through in the study is teaching enhancement. So teaching enhancement understood as any form of formal training, be it at the initial training level, teacher training level, or as continuous professional development for teaching. It is most of time, it is not a requirement, a legal requirement in most of the countries. However, there are 6 countries, and you see them on the map, where there is a legal requirement for this. And interestingly, in most of these countries, actually, there's been a recent legislative change. So a change either in criteria, so contributing to change academics' attitude, commitment towards teaching, better valorizing teaching in their careers, introducing possibilities for sabbatical or other incitative measures. And also what we can see is that teaching enhancement is recommended on a regular basis. But once again here, the biggest role is really left in terms of implementation to the higher education institutions themselves, who can also, of course, have their own criteria and requirement, especially when hiring and for career progression. And these measures can range from a systematic follow-up by their own institutional learning and teaching center to mandatory achievement or demonstration of achievement in career progression for becoming a full professor, etc. And often at entry level, there is support offered, but less as continuous professional development or for senior academics. In nearly all countries, teaching enhancement is offered by institutions themselves, typically through a learning and teaching center, and sometimes with a common offer across several institutions. And national dedicated structures, of course, can also propose teaching enhancement initiatives, projects, of training offers, etc. I think I will stop here for the first part, and also let Therese take the floor, because she, of course, would have a first-hand experience on many of these aspects. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you. And I mean, there's lots of details about the National Forum in Ireland in the report. So I thought today I just reflect, having been the director of the National Forum since its inception to the end of this year when I retired. I thought I'd actually sort of share the 10 things that I learned as director of the national agency that I thought that might be useful. So I suppose the first thing is that can we push on the slide? Yeah, please. Yeah, so the first thing that I've learned is having a national agency, the existence of one, and the commitment to one at a national level makes teaching and learning visible in higher education. And if there's one lesson that we've learned, if nothing is worth anything, if the value of teaching and learning is not understood and recognized. So that's a big statement, at a national level, that teaching and learning is valued in higher education. My second thing that I've learned is that being inclusive is important. The higher education sector has got many different players. You've got all those who learn, so you've got undergraduates, postgraduates, mature students, part-time students, all those who teach, and we have a broad definition of that. So you've got researchers, librarians, all institutional types. You've got universities, technological, higher education institutions, institutes of technology. This is just in Ireland, and then we've got private colleges. But we have students in higher education in all of those types of institutions. So I think that it's very important that we work with all of the sector and for the sector. Another thing is that we need structures in place to allow students and staff to guide and to provide feedback. So in Ireland, we had a student assembly and we had a staff assembly that did that. And we also need staff and students to help shape the agency itself. So in Ireland, we had a full-time student intern, and our staff was we brought staff in from the sector on secondment to help guide and shape the agency. The third thing is that evidence-based decision-making is essential. There's too much anecdote out there. We need to know what works. We need to know why it works. And if we're starting something, we need to know that we're starting where we're at. And sometimes that requires gathering data to say, this is where we're at. Now we know how we can build from. The fourth thing is the way the agency does its work is important. And this is one that's very dear to my heart. The agency, we have to be open and transparent. This is something that's key. You got to be representative and you got to be neutral. You got to be nimble in being consultative. You got to be responsive, and we constantly changed our team to bring new energy and new ideas, so that we always have that sort of looking forward and that sort of innovative, creative side to the National Forum. But you got to listen, and you got to be persistent, and sometimes you've got to resist. You got to know when to resist. You need to be connected at the system level, and you need to be future-looking. A national agency needs to look to the future so it can help prepare the sector for what's coming down, and keep that in mind. My fifth one is that partnership is important. And partnership, the worst thing you can have is if you've got a QA agency working on standards for professional development, and you've got an enhancement agency working on professional development framework. The agencies need to work together to bring synergies, so that that we're all sort of aligned, and I think that's absolutely essential. But you need to work with student bodies, you need to work with representative groups, you need to work with unions, and I think that partnership and that shared approach is really important. This one, nobody who knows me will be surprised. The next one is people are important. And working with people in this work. We certainly in the National Forum in Ireland, we believed in our people, right? And we believed that we had the potential to enhance teaching and learning, that potential already exists within our higher education sector, and our job was to respect it, was to nurture it, and was to support it. My seventh thing is that what a national agency does very well is to bring focus and coherence and support sustainable change. So we do that through the development of structures for consultation, for collaboration, through funding, through recognition, green frameworks that align the sector in a particular direction. So all of us are working on the same thing. Sometimes setting up enhancement themes that really will get every single institution and every player in the sector aligned with a particular enhancement theme. We had a number of them. We had one teaching for transitions, another one was assessment, and focusing those conversations are really important. You need to keep the output simple and in tune with what's needed. And you need to encourage ownership and build trust. Sector should be looking after and saying how it wants to develop. And that leads to my next thing, which is being trusted is absolutely essential. So being trusted is absolutely essential. Say what you're going to do and do it. And if you consult, don't give it lip service. If you consult, take on board what's actually said and actually make sure that that's changes or that's the way that you're going forward. You've got to be nonpartisan. Nobody has a stronger voice. I don't care whether there's system, whether there's, you have to be nonpartisan. And I think you get that sense of ownership and working together. I'd add another bit onto that, is that perfectionism is actually the enemy of the good. You'll never get a framework that everybody will agree on. What you're trying to do is just get it good enough so everybody can work on it. And then my ninth one is that a national agency optimizes the use of funding. And funding is very important to support innovation, but it has to be ring-fenced. There are black holes in our institution where funding is put, and teaching and learning, if it's not actually, the money isn't ring-fenced, the funding will not be targeted at teaching and learning. So that funding, and ideally the funding should be multi-annual. Institutions don't have the capacity to readily use funding up within a single annual cycle. It needs to be multi-annual to make it really work for institutions. And the final one is alignment. Alignment is needed to make the difference between sustainable enhancement and wasted resources and effort. And by alignment, I mean sectoral and system alignment. Sector needs to know where it wants to go. It should align, it should inform and be informed by policies, but the policies should line up so that as they're moving forward together. And I think what we really need is a purpose-driven approach, a sense of common agreement between levels and where policy and resources need to be directed in a sustainable way, and the need for different levels to communicate and ensure that policies and decisions direct resources and attention where they're needed. And that means when there's a policy made, funding allocated, it's not a surprise to the sector and they're not reacting. They already know that this is happening and they're planning for it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Terry. I think that's very clear 10 steps to follow if you want to build a national agency. On your last point, could you actually give us an example for this? So, I mean, how do you build a purpose-driven approach and a common sense of agreement towards sustainable goals, and decide then where the resources and the policy should go? I mean, that's probably a thorny way, isn't it? Not uncomplicated. Yeah.
But if you don't do it, all you get is institutions reacting because this fund's available now and that fund's available now, and then you've got half-finished, non-sustainable actions. It's mad. So I think the best example that I can see of where we were trying to head towards it at the end of last year was our project called Next Steps for Teaching and Learning Moving Forward Together. And what we did was we got every stakeholder in the sector, all the representative organizations worked together for 6 months to answer one question: what have we learned from what's happened with COVID-19, and what does it mean for teaching and learning going forward? And we shared all that knowledge, we pulled it together. We actually, what each partner did was they pulled together everything they had. We then synthesized that, and then we made an agreement that these are the things that are important as we move forward. I'd advise anybody that's interested in the project, it's all the data is available on our website, on the National Forum website. I think that's it. At least now, Ireland, at the end of that big, it only is a kind of it captures a particular time period, but building into it reviews and seeing where we're at now and taking stock of where we got to. But at least we have a starting point after what has been one of the most dramatic changes in higher education ever.
Indeed, and everybody has been involved. That's very important.
Yeah.
I can't see questions and answers. I mean, there's a lot going on in the chat, which confirms that we have participation from all over Europe and further afar. And there's no question and answer really, other than...
There is one question, Michael, I think. Okay.
Yes, there is support for our Ukrainian colleagues,
yes.
and indeed very much welcome that colleagues from Ukraine can be with us here in this difficult time. And there's one question: how about autonomy for universities, and how does it fit into the number 10, Terry?
Well, do you know what I've learned over the last 8 years is that institutions working together is a good thing, and collaboration is a good thing. We all recognize our own context, so. And it goes back to what I was saying. You don't try for perfection, because you never get it. But if you can develop frameworks and get agreements that everybody can work with, right? It means it can be interpreted in one's own context. So it leaves you to do the interpretation. So I think everybody is grappling with the same problems, and that together we're stronger.
Okay, good. As there are no more questions, maybe you continue to raise that.
I think there was just one question about learning and teaching, or teaching and learning. Is there a difference of philosophy here? Do you wish to quickly comment? And I can also quickly comment afterwards. Okay, Therese is laughing.
I'm laughing. I have been lectured, because in Ireland we talk about teaching and learning. And I've been lectured many times that the students are more important and that learning has to come first. And I keep making all mistakes. But in my head, right, both are equally important. And I don't care which way around they come, because we've got to get both right. But that's a personal view.
All right.
Good. Yeah. But now there are no more questions. Then.
What do you think, Therese?
Well, at the EUA, I think we decided when we launched those activities to call that learning and teaching, also to emphasize the importance of generally student-centered learning, so the learning aspects of the story. This being said, I think when we address topics that relate to teaching the teachers, we just say teaching, collaborative approaches in teaching. But I think it's a bit of a philosophical question, so I'm not quite sure if we'll have time to further develop it. But I find it fascinating, because actually, if you look into the different ways different languages address it, it's slightly different in other languages as well. But perhaps we'll keep that for the next coffee or drink we will have together at the European Learning and Teaching Forum, because it's a never-ending discussion.
Okay, but now there is one more question here. How do you get everybody to cooperate? I mean, how can people find time? And I think that's an important point for national agencies, that they give you a reason, a framework to make time. Terry?
Well, you start small. One of our most successful approaches was this. We had a national seminar series, where you had people with intrinsic motivation on particular topics were actually supported and funded to get people together who were also interested in that topic, and they could apply for funding for up to €1,000, which covered the sandwiches, the coffees, the teas, a speaker if they wanted. It was one of our most successful initiatives. And I can't actually remember, I think we must have run over the years, maybe close to 400 or 500 seminars over the 8 years. We had over 100 applications every year. What we did say was that you had to open it up outside of your own institution.
Mm.
So, and that was a very easy way. It was low-hanging fruit, not very expensive, but
Yeah.
building on that innate motivation that people have about particular topics.
But is that not also then one of the roles or one of the impacts that a national agency can have? That it, you said in the beginning, it makes it visible and valued in a way. So you have to make time for that. It's not just the what an individual staff wants to do, but it's the national agencies that has the offer, and then people can come or have to come in and cooperate.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's other things that you can do. Even, I mean, there's a whole questions about workload models and time for staff to do professional development. But if you're talking about doing a master's program, that's a mountain. If you're talking about doing 6 webinars with some stuff, some work that you're going to be doing, that you're going to be integrating into your own practice anyway, which is the model of the open courses that we developed based on advice from the sector. And they said, we're not going to commit to 5 ECTS credits or to full credited award. What they wanted, but we wanted it to be valuable enough professional development so that it would change practice. So it's not an afternoon workshop. It has to be bigger than that. So that's when we developed the open courses platform, and those open courses, which are 25 hours of work effort, which changes practice and which people feel that they can commit to. But that was the feedback from the sector that shaped all of that. So there's things like that you can do to try and encourage people to engage.
That's another point that Therese addressed in her last slides. Actually, it's the very diverse situation that we have across Europe with teaching enhancement. I mean, staff development, where we can clearly see. We believe there is an increase over time. We have seen that.
Yes, there is, but I mean, increase also in different directions. Not only in terms of having more, but also in terms of having perhaps a broader variety of what is addressed in teaching enhancement, in the training offer, what is perceived as important, and also probably increasing awareness towards the importance of this, and that it should somehow be a bit structured. There are actually not many countries where there is a, let's say, professional professional standard or professional development framework that is widely used, that is kind of shared across the board in the higher education sector. I know it's the case in Ireland. It is, I mean, the most known one is probably the one in the UK, the UK professional standard framework. But there are not that many countries actually that where a higher education sector widely uses such framework. It can still be a reference, a kind of reference point in kind of also situating as a teacher, where am I? What would be the next possibilities for me for training and things like that? Yes. But I just would like to add a quick word on the incentive part. In the publication, there are myriads of examples of indeed incentive measures, support measures at national level, but also EUA over the past years has published a number of thematic peer group reports. And I think in probably 90% of these reports, so the learning and teaching paper series, they are called, there are examples precisely addressing that point, how to create how to incentivize basically teachers for taking the time to look into their teaching, to reflect on it, to design the education model approach they want to use, etc. So, but this is really something that has been widely and hugely discussed in the thematic peer groups as well.
Okay, there was another question about whether private universities, whether you have seen any differences in countries with private universities in your research, Therese, in the study.
This is a question I cannot really answer simply because I cannot relate XY development in country A to the fact that they are or are not private universities. Most of time, developments in learning and teaching have strings attached, let's say, to a variety of reasons and factors that do not necessarily relate to the private or non-private status of institutions themselves. It might be a matter of public priority for education, a matter of funding available, a matter of legislation and the level of autonomy also that institutions have, a matter of autonomy that the teachers have in innovating, but also in doing what they need to do for their classes in the framework of curriculum design and delivery. So I cannot really say in XY country there is this particular feature, because there's a number of private or non-private universities in that country. This is something I cannot. This is like a casualty I cannot really make from what we have. Yeah.
I have another question here on how to move away from regulation and develop policies that encourage grassroots initiatives and value autonomy of the academics. I think partly we have already answered that, unless one of you has a immediate response.
I think
to that.
partly we have answered that, but also here again we could stress the importance of teaching really in academic careers, and in the overall role of teaching and the education mission for universities in general. If it is not valued, if it is not visible, then it all becomes a bit difficult. Terry, any view on this?
Yeah, I would just agree. I think we've covered it.
We have another question on teaching enhancement and whether it would not be good to have an international or a European approach towards it. Could we not have a collaborative international or European approach to, I guess that's to teaching enhancement? Enhancement, yeah, enhancement of learning and teaching.
Well, I think the European Digital Hub, I think, is going to be moving towards that a bit. It's in my head, I think it's a forum at a European level. Yes, its focus is going to be in the digital space. But what I like about the whole idea is that often when we're working as partners in Europe, our knowledge is respected. So I learn what you've done.
Yes.
Whereas I think what I'm hoping the European Digital Hub is going to do at the European level is that we'll plan what needs to be done on a big scale, and we'll learn from each other, and again, stronger and smarter together. I think that part of it, that's what that's going to bring. So I'm quite excited about that, actually.
Yeah, and I guess that's also a bit what is behind the Bologna Learning and Teaching Working Group. I mean, it's really exploring what is done in the different systems and what works, and hopefully to learn for that. And gradually we have more convergence on this. So we also see that the situation is different in different countries. So
I just would like to also remind in this regard that we had a previous project in the past year that was called Effect, and was precisely dedicated to the idea of, let's look into the feasibility of a European forum, we called it, but basically a European format for enhancing learning and teaching. And we had a final report published, I think it was in 2018. And at the end of that report, actually, we explored different scenarios of how we could have a European level structure for teaching enhancement. So I can put the link in the chat box after this. And the overall broad conclusion we reached at that time was that what makes really good at European level is that we enable and support those peer-based exchanges, peer learning, etc., which is also a bit what is being done in the Bologna process nowadays.
Okay. Here another one. I'm not sure that we can answer this. How are the learning and teaching centers connected with preparing the future professors and instructors while they are earning their PhDs?
There is no one single way, because we are talking here about centers that are based at institutions, so they might have different ways of operating. I don't like the expression actually examples of good practice, but if I would point to some examples of practices in some universities, for example, they do actually propose modules that are embedded into PhD programs, into doctoral schools. Some of them are mandatory. And those are modules that can relate, for example, to, let's say, university pedagogy for dummies, or introducing you to university pedagogy, etc. Also, with the idea in mind that, studies and also at third level are relatively discipline based. So not everybody would have a kickstart level, let's say, of knowledge into what education science may bring, what teaching actually means, etc. So those are modules that I think exist in several places. And also some, at times, also, let's say, more active modules, such as peer-to-peer discussions about teaching, mentoring, coaching, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Terry, a word on that, or?
Just, the examples from Ireland would have been quite similar.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I could just carry on because we have many questions here.
Yes.
So, given that there's a question on whether, as there is a lack of activities to support teaching, is there merit in developing cross-country online, or I could even say European online development, online webinars and networks to support learning and teaching and pedagogical development? I'm actually not sure whether there is a lack of activities to support teaching. Depends probably where you are, but
I think it depends where you are.
Yeah.
The problem might be that you don't always have time to take those, even if they are available. And here again, we are back to the question of how time is valued, really, in terms of workload, teaching load, and whatever way you would put it in informal terms. But yes, what we heard a lot during the pandemic, but I guess it's not only for the pandemic time, is just this kind of also teaching fatigue, that teachers have to cope with everything in addition to research and other other missions they have, and this might also be an important factor for actually undertaking the training. Terry, you would have a view on this?
Yeah, just I suppose it's the same. I think there was a time there when there was too much available, and the choice was quite difficult to make. And I think that one thing that COVID has done for us is to make opportunities much more accessible, I suppose, than they were before. Before, we would have gone to conferences, and now, because we don't have to travel, we don't have to be there face to face, we can actually access and get in. We're now thinking that now we do have to have this recorded, or we do have to have this live streamed. I think that there's more opportunities than there's ever been, rather than less. So
yeah,
that would be based on my experience, I think.
Yeah. I mean, what we can still see in our studies, and this is confirmed by anecdotal feedback from colleagues from institutions, is that it is still not as teaching as an academic activity is not everywhere valued. It's also very difficult to emphasize teaching enhancement and staff development in that area.
Yeah, but teaching and learning became very visible through COVID. We have an opportunity now to keep it on the agenda.
Absolutely, yeah. So I have I think that's the last question here now. Are the panelists aware of any national level policy on assessment ratings? No.
I don't understand what is assessment weighting.
I don't understand it. I thought you understand it. Maybe the colleague.
Hello, Loretta. I think we've met before. How I understand it is it's related to assessment policy, I guess.
Okay.
Generally. I wouldn't have comments right now on this because I'm not quite sure.
Maybe the colleague can clarify, and we may answer that later on. Then there is some very last, and I can't resist here. It's about overcoming the gap between teaching and research. Then we could talk for the rest of the afternoon about this. So
yes.
I think
if you don't have good teaching and learning, you don't have good researchers.
Indeed, yeah. It's often said what research can do for teaching. We should change it also the other way around and think of what teaching does for research. Okay, Good. Therese, we still have 15 minutes. You want to go back to your presentation?
Yes, please. Yes, because dear audience, we're not done with the presentation part. We have some other slides. So bear with us. I think I will shorten a bit as we spend a lot of time also discussing, which is great because this is also what you look for in webinars, right? To have some discussion. Another point we explored in that study is interinstitutional cooperation. Here I have to say we did not have big surprises. However, I was struck by the importance given to the European University initiative and what this could do to support interinstitutional collaboration in learning and teaching. I would say that generally the importance and value of partnership and collaboration can be in teaching can be noticed at all levels. So not only across institutions, but also within institutions, because faculties, departments, and even study programs can have also very different ways to address the way they want to teach, the way they want their students to learn, and also sometimes the way they want to design the curriculum, for example. So the role of university alliances and associations in enabling cooperation is quite important. And also what we can see is that in some countries, there is also collaboration that is enabled through national initiatives. I have in mind right now the example that our Slovenian colleague gave us, for example, about projects that were ESF funded partly and aimed also at raising the level of collaboration in learning and teaching across all universities of the country. But most of the time, it's still interinstitutional cooperation in teaching mostly happens through bilateral and multilateral cooperation between institutions. So it can be ad hoc on their own initiative, sometimes also with their own funding. But when in countries where it takes place in a more structured way, there are some actors that can help for that. For example, typically national rectors' conferences. There are, for example, in some of them, working groups gathering vice rectors in education from all universities in the country. National structures dedicated to learning and teaching, once again, as Terry underlined, and also sometimes networks, they can be organized on a territorial basis, so local, regional, linguistical basis, and also institution profile basis. I'm going to the next slide. There is sometimes national support for participating into such cooperation, although it is not exactly widespread. And as I mentioned here, it is the examples we received were mostly related to participation of institutions to the European University initiative. And also interinstitutional cooperation can be supported through other means than funding or having a dedicated project gathering in universities together. For example, it can be accounted for in accreditation criteria, evaluation criteria in the framework of the external quality assurance measures and procedures in place in a given country. Some experts also underlined challenges that can arise from cooperating, especially in systems where institutions are actually, for a myriad of reasons, actually to compete against each other in terms of gaining more students or for public funding. Okay, I'm going to quickly address the result we had when we asked our experts, what do you think about plans for the future in learning and teaching? And this question took place in the precise framework of COVID years and what will happen also after COVID. So in a number of countries at that time, and we conducted these interviews last year, at that time, no defined plan yet, because we are still at the mapping phase, evaluation phase. The notable example of something that has been done in this regard was given by Terry already. It's the Next Steps project in Ireland. You will find the link in the chat box. And also what we could see is that the attention to digital will remain probably, and that also prompted to some regulatory changes in a number of countries. It also prompted people to realize that their legislation was not adapted to either online or hybrid or blended learning, in terms of counting workload for teachers, in terms of what can be valid or not when when you earn a degree or when you earn credits for a class. So some digital and open policies to be adapted, and also a few projects, as I already mentioned before, on digital competences for teachers, but also for students, on the workload for students, and how to adapt current standard, etc. And there was also an expert that pointed to increased attention in the country towards academic integrity, mostly related to assessment. Just a few words on this one. When we asked also about what would you identify as most common obstacles and also most common drivers, enablers for enhancing learning and teaching in the future, unsurprisingly, the most commonly cited obstacles were lack of recognition for teaching in careers. This is about recognition, about time, also about resource distribution, about visibility, but also a visibility of the teaching and the education mission, but also about the increased pressure over academics to do more and more in various missions of the university. Also, a lack of support for teaching at institutions. Some institutions might need more expertise simply in promoting teaching, more expertise in capacity building, how to set up a learning and teaching center, who to take in charge these teaching teacher training offers, etc. A lack of clear framework or commitment at national level was also cited, as well as, understandably so, uncertainty towards the future. So there was a momentum created by the pandemic that has been acknowledged by many in terms of innovating in teaching, but also there was a strong teaching fatigue that should also be underlined, with teachers required to switch to online teaching, to emergency teaching overnight, but then to get back to on-site teaching, to think through the value of on-site teaching, and nowadays also more and more to cope with all of that, and in addition to offer hybrid teaching. Among the most commonly cited drivers, what we could hear here is a genuine and general interest in the higher education community to do better, and also to better train new generations of teachers. I already cited the public attention towards teaching during the pandemic and the post-pandemic window of opportunity for that. It was also underlined that actually in some countries there were a number of projects that yielded to positive results for better equipping institutions and individuals, and also collaboration on learning and teaching, as already underlined before. Yes. Michael, I'm getting back to you.
Yeah. Do you want us to run the poll now?
Are you asking me, or? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. No, I can't do that. Therefore, I think then Aurélie has to publish it, or?
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Here is it.
So, if you could answer the question, which of the following need to be developed further in order to enhance learning and teaching in your country? And you can tick several. And,
so
just a few seconds before we close it.
For our participants, you can actually see the results as they move under the polls tab that is in the
Can everybody see
right.
that?
Yes.
Okay.
The results, it's moving.
So under open. Relatively spread. Okay, I think we can close that. Any comment, Therese, on this?
Looking at the results. The results are available and visible for all under polls, and then it's called closed, the tab. What we can see here is that the most popular is which of the following need to be developed is consideration for teaching in academic careers and training incentives and support for teachers, right? And it is closely followed by more funding, specifically for enhancing learning and teaching, clear strategy at national level, collaboration between higher education institutions, digital strategy, and infrastructure development.
I mean, one thing that you can learn from this, that we about captured this because there was only one other, so people were actually happy with these answering options, and quality assurance, national legislation or quality assurance seem not to be the major problem. So it's really on teaching and careers, the incentives and support for teachers that play a major role here, and more funding, of course.
I think we probably could have projected that it was going to certainly the top two. I do think it's very important, but I'm not sure it's going to go far enough if we want teaching and learning to be really valued. I think, we need to recognize and value the careers. We need to have those structures for teachers at an individual level.
Yeah.
But they don't work in isolation. They work together. So how do we get discipline groups or faculties to actually commit to teaching and learning enhancement? So they have to be recognized. And what do we do with institutions that say, for us, teaching and learning is a key area, it's part of who we are? How do we recognize those institutions? So I think that there's a need to look broader than just the individual. Now, I know in the poll, there wasn't a thing that said, looking at working with teams and things like that. But I think if we want to really embed teaching and learning enhancement, recognition for individuals, value for teaching and learning enhancement across institutions, we need to think more than just about the individual careers and see how that can actually expand.
I think I agree, Terry. And usually we ask this question a bit differently. You can't tick all that you want, but you can only tick the top 3 or so. And then teaching in academic careers, it comes out really very strongly. But what it also takes along is it's not just the juxtaposition of research and education, is generally the question about academic careers and the many things that academic staff do within institutions. So you need these diverse career paths with parity of esteem for research and teaching, but also for the other things that people do in administration, in outreach, in international collaboration, and yeah, so it's not just like that you get your recognition through research achievement, and also just through specific research achievement. So third-party funding and highly reputed journal publications. So, and I think that's the discussion that we have at the moment, as there was before the question about strategies. I think we don't have a strategy really to overcome the gap between research, or the disconnect between research and education. But we can see there's growing unsatisfaction and problems with the way of how these careers currently work in institutions, and in some systems that has been addressed. I mean, we know that in Norway, we know it in the Netherlands, and there's a lot of discussion and also some action on this now to change career paths.
Well, it's an interesting one, because in Ireland there was a big consultation last year for research at policy level. There was a big consultation for access and participation and student success. Teaching learning at that policy level has never had that kind of a consultation, and I don't think it has in a lot of countries. I think it should have, because at that level, it's a multi-annual, it's a multi-year kind of plan. It's got funding associated, it's implemented, there's incentives to do it, and teaching learning seems to miss out to get up there. And yet it appears, because it's in all these different policies, because you can't do things without it. So I just think that it needs its own space, so that clear national strategy for learning and teaching would probably have been one of my first ones, because properly thought out, it encompasses all of the others that are there.
That's almost a closing statement, Terry, as we we are a minute to 3. Therese, is there anything you want to conclude from this?
I think we have discussed the main and really important and repetitively important points here already. And yeah, so I would perhaps just conclude by saying that it was actually a very interesting piece of research also for me, because through all the examples that we could find across the European higher education area, the most striking part for me has been that there is really a general willingness to do better, to do better, and sometimes to do differently. So, of course, one may say that such researchers are always a bit biased because I only go and talk to people who actually know about learning and teaching. But there is a general, we can really see that arising also from the, let's say, the European policy horizon, that there is really an awareness being there that we need to do better collectively. So yeah, I think we have here material to reflect on, perhaps also to drive some kind of self-assessment, self-review on what in each country, each institution we have already in place, and how to progress collectively and together from there.
I think that's probably what everybody can agree, that this is a massive change compared to 5 years, 6 years ago. When we look at learning and teaching, a lot has happened, and also a very changed environment indeed. This brings us to an end of this webinar. Thanks to Terry and thanks to Therese. We would have had a few more interesting facts to present from the report, but the report is there, you can read it, and we will also present it, I think, in other contexts. Remains to me then to give you an outlook on what happens next at EUA. So our upcoming event, we have a webinar on DELT. This is digitally enhanced learning and teaching in curriculum and assessment. That's the outcome of a thematic peer group that we have been running over the last year under EUA's learning and teaching initiatives. And then there is our big annual conference, and we look forward to it as this is our first major physical event after 2 years of sanitary measures in the COVID pandemic. So join us in Budapest for university values, what, why, and how, more important than ever. And then there's a series of webinars on universities and democracy, and a conference on Spotlight on Recognition, and a new world continuation of a webinar that we had before. So you're welcome to join us for this, and thanks so much for your attention and for the very active discussion that was really inspiring also for us. So thanks, and have a good afternoon, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks to Michael and Terry as well. Thank you. Bye.